Welcome to Talking New York Real Estate with Vince Rocco. Our show is all about the exciting world of real estate and in particular, how it relates to the luxury New York marketplace. But if you are not planning a real estate transaction in New York, we still have plenty of information you can use no matter where you are. Now, here's our show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Vince Rocco in New York, where the state of our industry needs to be real. So let's get right to what everyone is talking about. Pricing is one of the most difficult and most consequential conversations in New York City real estate ever, and most agents are still approaching it the wrong way. Instead of treating pricing as a forward-looking strategy about positioning in a live, competitive market, it's often handled as a backward-looking valuation exercise based on outdated comps. That misframing leads to overpriced listings, delayed adjustments, and ultimately lower sales prices. In reality, listings don't compete with what sold months ago. They compete with what buyers see and choose from today. And timing is everything. The first 2 to 4 weeks are your peak leverage window when every serious buyer sees your listing for the first time. Attention is highest and urgency is real. This is when deals get made if you are positioned correctly. If you are not, the market still reacts, just not in your favor. The difference between getting pricing right up front and closing the market later can mean the difference between a fast, full leverage sale or months and months on the market with meaningful price erosion. That's what we're talking about today. And here on set with me is Jared Anton from Brown Harris Stevens and John Walkup from Urban Digs and the popular Talking Manhattan podcast. And they join me today to discuss. But first, let me welcome my listeners and viewers from across the United States and all around the globe. This is Talking New York Real Estate. So let's go behind the headlines and inside the state of our industry.
Hi, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you know the right partner makes all the difference. At Roadway, we deliver an experience your clients will love. For specialized services and white glove care, choose Roadway. Want to learn more? Email me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
Okay, everybody, we are back, and today our topic is going to be pricing, and a great article by John written just last week or the week before that Jared sent to me and I read, and then Jared put an article on our blog here at Brown Harris Stevens, sort of along the same lines. And, you know, one of the reasons why I jumped on this episode is because I think pricing is really where things in this industry can just come to a screeching halt. And I remember when I was hired 24 years ago here to work as a real estate agent, I remember my first manager said to me, as he used to say to everybody, if you don't price well and you don't price right, it's not going to sell. So here I'm a brand new real estate agent thinking, okay, he's a little dippy or whatever. What does that even mean? Well, he was right. 24 years later, he was 100% right. And it's still the same. If you don't price right, you're going to have a problem and you're going to linger on the marketplace. And as I said in the opening, you're going to still be out there, but you're going to be looking to drop price and drop price and drop price, linger on the market way too long. And we all know what buyers say when they see a listing on the market for a long time. Something wrong with that. Now, John, let me start with you.
Okay.
Do you think most agents are still misdiagnosing pricing as valuation instead of positioning? And where does that show up in deals?
Totally. I don't know if that most agents, but certainly it does happen, and it shows up all the time. And where you're going to see it really is listing discounts and stales, like listings that are going off market. That is listings essentially that have been on the market for 6 months or so. You've seen multiple price cuts. It's not selling, and then it just disappears off the market. That is an obvious, clear case of an agent maybe not intentionally getting the price wrong, but essentially the price is wrong.
Jared, so, you know, how do you reframe that conversation, you know, with a seller or whatever, or a buyer? What is it worth? And where do we need to be to win? Because even sellers will say that to us. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through the conversation today. Sometimes sellers will agree and accept what you tell them, sometimes not. But just in general, okay, what is it really worth? And where do you need to be price-wise to win in any market, I'm going to say, most especially today because we're in a little bit of a weird market, or have been, although I think things are really picking up lately. Where do we need to be to win?
Yeah, so there's a few important themes to sort of set the stage here, right? So there's this subjective versus objective sort of discussion when you're talking to a seller. And I love what John and Urban Digs put out because they lean 100% in that objective category.
Yeah.
The data doesn't lie. So when you're working with the seller, they're going to be anchored from a subjective nature to the emotional connection they have to that property, to the memories, to the amount of money that they, spend building it. But as John wrote in his article, buyers don't care about that, right? And then agents are also dealing with this thing where they're trying to say, hey, I'll give you the stars and the sky and the sun and the moon if you list with me, meaning that they'll overpromise just to win the listing and, whittle the seller down. And I've, heard from agents time and time again that they've either lost listing pitches because they gave a realistic price and the seller wanted to be sold something more, or they felt this pressure to have to offer a price that they truly didn't feel comfortable with as a way of trying to win the listing, right? Or not lose it, I should say. And both of those are not good. I never liked trying to overpromise and underdeliver with the seller. I never like to promise them it's worth more than it is. And I like to take a very direct tact where I'll call out to a seller and I'll say, look, I know you may think it's a cop-out for me to tell you that the number one variable right now of how quickly, how much control and what price you get is based upon how you price. I get it because I'm an agent and sure, I want to take your property and sell it. But I am telling you, price is the only variable right now amongst these other controlled pieces. So I like to try to take that direct thing and I can say, look, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, if you want me to tell you your home is worth 10, 50, 100 million, I could do it. But that doesn't mean I can get it sold, right? So I think the important thing is calling out when you're starting this conversation with the seller, some of these ridiculous fallacies just to be able to clear the air. And then that gives you a better deck to start rebuilding it in an area where you have some control.
Aspirational pricing, we all know what that's about. We've talked about it. You just explained it very well. I say it every week when I'm teaching continuing ed, in law of agency, one of the first classes you take as a new salesperson, and then have to take every 2 years as a renewal to get your license renewal, we talk about pricing accurately, and it's really against the laws of agency in our business to not price right. Now, look, we can aspirationally price, and as long as we get the seller to agree that if things don't go well, we reduce over time. Not a great strategy, but sometimes, and we'll talk about it in a minute, a seller is going to want what they want, and that is what it is. But John, let me ask you, so what data do you lead with first as an agent talking to a seller? Closed comps, active inventory report, or something else, and why? And I think the reason why sellers may be not grasping what we're trying to say is because they're not paying attention.
Right. Well, let's back up a second and think about what does it mean to actually sell your apartment. So you're actually entering into a market where you have buyers who are looking at units similar to yours and getting a sense for which ones do I want to prioritize, which ones do I want to see. So in that sense, basing it on closed comps, basing it on things transactions that probably happened 6 to 9 months ago, it's great. It's really helpful. It's a very value-oriented way to understand the market. However, it's a rear-view mirror market. So if you like to drive your car with the rear-view mirror, you're in great company. However, the real key is competition because you are facing other units that are trying to sell that are very similar to yours. So the real competition or the real way to do it is understand where things were closing, but look at the market today. Who are you in competition with? That's the real key factor. What recently went into contract? How does it differ from yours? What's on the market similar to yours? How is it priced? And how do you fit into that? That's really sort of the sphere that you really have to understand more than, say, closed comps.
But Jared, you touched on it a minute ago and when you responded, and I'm saying sellers consistently still want to look to past pricing, right? Past pricing. Well, my neighbor, 5 years ago, 2 flights up, got $100,000 more than you're telling me today, just using numbers, 50,000, whatever the number is. They don't get it, okay? They don't necessarily follow the marketplace or follow the trends. So how do we break that thought early enough in conversation? Because I've heard a lot of agents don't get or have heard them complain that they're not getting a listing because they're not able to, really correctly explain to the seller what the issue is. So, they're always going to look back and past pricing. How do we break that thought in them?
So when a seller first speaks to me, right, and he's asking, hey, what's my property worth? I'll ask, are you asking just for a general ballpark because you're curious, where your value is today? Or are you actually considering selling? Because if you just want a value, then sure, we can give you a ballpark based upon where things have sold, very much a rearview mirror. But if you actually want to sell, then we need to have a different conversation. It's not what is my home worth, it's what is the right pricing strategy to accomplish your goals. So your goals include, sure, selling your property, but what's your time frame? Do you have an immediate need? Is this a little bit more of an elongated? Where are you going after? What are you trying to optimize for based upon your time frame or other, parameters? Are you optimizing towards the highest price? Are you optimizing towards minimizing, board rejection risk? Are you optimizing towards having cash, not financing? What is the thing that you're optimizing to? All of that comes into this larger sort of pricing strategy. So if we reframe a seller off of saying, well, okay, if I want to net X, then that means I have to market it for X plus Y. No, it's understanding, okay, what's the right strategy to be able to get you out with the most amount of money? And sometimes listing for less is actually the better strategy if we can create a bidding war. And I think that's an important thing, is breaking that sort of common methodology that it's, you're going to get X amount off of ask. We need to build in room for negotiation. You're building in room for you to negotiate against yourself, not for buyers to negotiate with you at that point.
Yeah, but as you just said, the need to net is always on their mind. Look, I spent $400,000 renovating and I paid, X amount of dollars for the apartment. So that need to net is on their mind and they can't get it out of their mind. But we have to, as agents, I believe, and I said to you, John, before we started the show, this morning, we have to learn how to better communicate and better negotiate, because a need to net comes up. I just put a couple of listings up and it was the same conversation, as it always is. I won, I got my point. However, I don't always, because it's not always so easy. Yeah. How do you break that need to net?
Well, we look at data.
Because those numbers, those numbers are real.
They are real, and that's part of the problem, is that when you look at real numbers, when you look at comps, when you look at your neighbor who sold in a different market 10 years ago, these are real numbers. And that's the problem, is that value that seems so real is actually theoretical. Winning, like getting a deal, that's behavioral. That's something you actually need to be taking action on. So that's the disconnect. There are ways to slice and dice the data to sort of understand this. So, to your point about renovation versus unrenovated, we'll run the data and we can show you that, the market's definitely paying a premium for things like recent renovations, decent amenities, light views. It will pay a premium there, but it's a bounded premium. In that case, it's not an emotional thing. So if you walk in and something like knocks your socks off, wow, that's great. But at the end of the day, buyers are still going to put a cap on how much more they're going to pay for it or how much they're going to penalize you
100%.
for it. And if you can help understand that and then sort of put it into the framework, like, all right, if you want to test your value theory, we can do it. But let me just show you the fact that if you try this and it doesn't work, you're going to end up cutting your price to below where it should trade today, and it's going to take you 6 months. So
or more. But
Right.
what about the agent who walks into a seller and the empathy is like, oh, I know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I know you need to net this and I know you need to net that. When does that become a problem, when the agent says, okay, we'll do it, knowing full well, based on what you just said and what you said a little while ago, Jared, wrong price. And it's going to sit, and it's not going to sell.
I think empathy
So you can be empathetic, but why?
It's totally needed before you get the listing. You need to be empathetic. You need to understand the seller, what their problems are, what their solution, what their situation is. That's all well and good. But once it hits the market, you're out of empathy territory and you're in action territory. And you need to be understanding like what's happening today, what happened this week, to affect where we're likely going to be. How does that affect our strategy? Right. And if you just simply walk in and you're super empathetic and you're like, you try to buy the listing with that high price, I mean, you really just bought your ticket. You bought yourself a ticket on the slow riding price cut machine, which is you're going to get off and nothing's going to happen.
Not that I want to bash the agent pool. However, I am an agent. However, you said the word strategy, and I laugh. How many agents, when they take a listing, have a strategy in selling it? Sorry, but not many, okay? I got a listing. That's it, done. Run down the road. Wrong price, months on the market. Now what, right? Which leads me to the question, Jared. So how do you communicate the importance to sellers when you're talking to them that the first 2 to 4 weeks are where you're going to get your biggest hit, where you're going to get the most interest because you're brand new and because the pricing may be right or wrong? But do sellers really understand that right up front, you're going to hit 2 to 4 weeks, and then you're going to die?
So our market is unique right now. If you look at the metrics, the market is fundamentally completely balanced on paper, right? It is a neutral market, neither favoring buyers or sellers. So that means that we are in a broker's broker market. It means good old-fashioned elbow grease. Now, the reality is it's only balanced on the surface when you look at the averages. It means that it's a two-speed market. There's sellers markets and there's buyers markets dictated basically solely on how we're seller priced. You have a majority of the demand going after a minority of the supply, because while buyers are active, while there's a lot of appetite for our market, while we have a healthy market, buyers are now incredibly informed, incredibly aware of value, and fearful of overpaying. And the most important thing is that there is no extrinsic motivation in the marketplace. Prices are not running away higher. They're slowly creeping up there, and we're in a healthy sort of stable market. There's no push or pull from interest rate moves right now. So buyers and sellers are transacting based upon their own intrinsic life needs. And this is important because there is no external pressure to make buyers move. What that means is that they're not reacting out of FOMO or fear. So the first thing I like to talk about a seller is your number one choice when you price your home is whether you were selling into a buyer's market or a seller's market. If they choose to sell into a buyer's market, they're going to price too high, they're going to give up control and leverage, and they're going to have to react to that one buyer that may come along and will dictate the terms. If they decide to sell into a seller's market, they're going to be able to price at or slightly below market, get a lot of competition, get a lot of people in there. Now, what happens is when you get a lot of people in the property, people generally want what they cannot have. So if there are 5, 10, 15 people in an open house, they see that there's competition. What you're doing is you're getting people emotionally connected to the property. You're getting people riled up and they want to compete. If there's only one person that's circling a property, they feel that there's no competition and they're able to take advantage of that seller, right? So people will do irrational things when they are emotionally invested or connected. So create the irrationality in the market. This is the beauty of pricing low and let people do funny things.
Yeah, Jared, sorry, Vince, but Jared absolutely nailed it as always. So,
as always, right.
I know.
But that's correct.
It's correct. And I want to say, so one of the metrics that we have is called listing climate. And it's essentially a ratio of successful to unsuccessful listings. And when you layer that on top of price per square foot prices, one of the things that's really interesting to look at is prices are essentially right now where they were back in, say, like 2017, 16, sort of at the previous peak. In some cases, they're a little higher. In some cases, they're a little lower. However, if you think about just pricing at that same thing and just like, all right, well, I bought it here, I'm just going to price it at that point. Let's just see what happens. You'll probably end up losing. Because at that point, you think back to the listing climate way back when, it was furious. I mean, it was on fire, this market. What does that mean? That means you can price something over the market, have an open house, and still expect people to show up thinking like, all right, well, I'll check it out. Maybe I'll negotiate down, but at least I'll come see it. Now, if you do that same approach, price it high, people they're going to ignore it. They're not even going to come see it.
100%.
And the last thing I want to fold on to that, because I mean, Jared, as always, opens up just such great stuff. When you look at listing discount by days on market, it's amazing. There are two things that stand out. The first thing is if you've priced it right, which means you've gotten a contract in under 30 days, that listing discount is, I mean, it's solid. Going back for however long you want to go back, it's basically 3% or less. When the market's really running, it's actually a negative listing discount, meaning you're getting over ask. The problem is when you've been on the market over 60, 90 days, if you're 120 days on the market, 6 months, that listing discount in a tight market, like when the market's really running, maybe it's 8%. Still have to negotiate.
Could be more.
But when the market slows down, I mean, it'll rise to 15, 16%. So it's just like an extra dose of punishment. So the key is like, if you price right, you're going to be getting your asking price in any kind of a market. 100%. If you price wrong, I mean, open the door to pain.
All right, we've got to take a quick break. A word from our sponsors. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
And we are right back. John, I just wanted to ask you a question based on what you said before the break, because you're absolutely correct. But what specific signals do we kind of catch in the first 30 days if the pricing is off? right? I mean, you touched on a little bit before the break, but we're on the market 30 days. We're not getting any kind of whatever. What are those signals?
Well, I'll speak to a few that I can see, but I'm sure Jared can speak to some of the ones that are even behind the veil more. Obviously, there are some elephants in the room when it comes to listing your property in New York City for market. The biggest one is Street Easy. Everyone's got to kind of be there. That is the marketplace
Indeed.
for the world, for New York City. You're going to have listings, metrics on saves, how many people have saved it, clicked it, that kind of thing, viewed it. If you're not getting those, there's a disconnect. That's one thing right there. I don't have insight into that because I don't have access to your listing or
Right.
that kind of stuff, but I can look and see who's gotten the saves, and you can kind of get a sense for, all right, well, is this a popular listing or not? And, speaking of, if you're in this market right now, we don't necessarily have a demand problem. It's probably a price problem. So if you're not getting those saves, that's the first thing. The second thing is, well, how many people are at your showings? How many people are open houses? And again, this is information you're going to know more at the brokerage level because you can kind of keep track of that. But if you're not seeing traffic and other listings are seeing traffic, again, that's another signal. You should be paying attention to that. Take one more step. If you're getting the showings, if you're getting the people coming in, but you're not getting second showings, if you're not getting offers, that's yet one more signal, final signal that they're like, hey, listen, you're close, but you're not there.
Jared, you touched on it before, when you talked about a seller's market and a buyer's market, and we all know in this industry, pricing is very different in a seller's market than a buyer's market, much higher or typically much lower. Your opinion, when we need to talk to sellers, and sellers remember, well, my neighbor, as I said before, just got, $50,000 more. And I say, yeah, well, that was a seller's market. And this is not the market right now. And based on John's article, you've got to look and see what the buyers are willing to buy today, not 6 months ago or whatever. Your opinion, Jared. So what if a seller says to you, well, then I'll just wait for the next seller's market?
And that's fine. I mean, every seller doesn't need to sell today, right? One way that I like to help sellers figure out value too is to take them on a tour, take them out for a day as a buyer, right? And put them in the shoes of that buyer.
Absolutely.
And let them see the other inventory. But it's true that there is not a market for every property today. Unfortunately, Turtle Bay, Sutton Place has been overlooked for about 10 years.
Yeah.
Part of this is due to decrease in international buyers around the UN. Part of this is due to a change in the typical sort of pied-à-terre buyer that was a longtime proponent of that neighborhood. But in some instances, in some properties, studios are having this challenge as a generalization.
Absolutely.
The price that it would take to sell today is arguably too low for what it's actually worth. Like they would be giving it away. So if the seller doesn't need to sell today, then wait, especially if they have a condo or even a co-op that has a flexible sublet policy, then take advantage of the rip-roar rental market that is certainly a landlord's market and rent it out for a year or two and see where it goes.
So playing what if, right? So we got a seller who says that, and you say, okay, fine. You want to wait for the seller's market? Great. We don't know that a seller's market's coming back. We've been waiting 2.5, almost 3 years for a seller's market.
Well, we've had 10 years of flat prices. So.
And we've had, exactly. So, I mean, there's that, okay? So when you're talking to a seller, are you, and you're trying to come up with that right price, are you setting pricing adjustments in that conversation, the expectation that, all right, you want to start a little higher, aspirational, but let's talk about what we're going to be reducing at what number and over what period of time? I do that. If somebody comes to me, which recently happened, about $50,000 over market, and I said, you're not going to sell. So you want to talk about where we're going to start reducing, or do you want to start where I think we're going to sell? And by the way, already lots of interest. Isn't that something?
Yeah. It depends on the seasonality. I mean, I would argue that if you're trying to put on a property now, late April, early May, we are in the second half of the spring market. This is as peak as it can get. So you would be wasting the prime time to try to misprice it. If you were listing a property, in early February and we were, still in spring training, so to speak, then sure, the pricing penalty for overpricing and missing the market is less great there. So there's definitely that timing aspect. But I think you can also, as an agent, leverage some really important resources, whether it's the Urban Digs Advisor Service, where you're going to get, an unbiased third party that comes in and gives you a valuation. And I've used this, and my agents have used this too with sellers where there's a big gap between, hey, this is what I think it's worth as a trusted advisor, and we're the seller. So let's bring in a trusted third party. They're going to come to it from a different way than appraisal will, because they're going to come more from a market action forward-looking piece rather than that rear view. And then I'll list it at whatever, Urban Digs advisor says. And that's great. Like, that's a good way to try to bridge the gap. The other thing that I have found helpful is bring in your colleagues then, right? Bring in a team of colleagues, have them come in and get sort of a collective, educated consortium of price, right? And this is part of the way that here at BHS, we have sold our properties for fewer days on market, so we sold them quicker and for a higher percentage of asking price than any other firm in New York City when you look at the data for 2025. Why? Because we have incredible marketing and because we are smart and educated with how we price our properties because we want them to be able to move.
Yeah. John, do you guys have at Urban Digs, by the way, sign up. It's a great source of information and data in our industry. I mean, I cannot live without it, quite frankly. But do you guys have data on how many listings are priced incorrectly versus how many priced correctly as they enter market, or is that just kind of a let's wait and see what happens?
I'll just break that into two parts. Yes, we have data. We have a lot of data.
I know you do.
But what you're talking about, no. And because every listing is essentially it's its own market and it's unique. And one of the things that we like to talk about is really there are three reasons something doesn't sell. It's either a market problem, in which case there's a little bit of a market problem right now, as Jared mentioned, especially studios, certain neighborhoods. You're having co-ops, unrenovated units. Sometimes these are having a hard time.
And studios, to clarify, because it's a first-time buyer, more than not.
Yeah, so I mean, the studio market, just to talk about that briefly, right? It's a very interest rate sensitive market. You have a lot of competition on the rental side, and you have less of an interest for people to come in and buy studios when the job market's uncertain. I mean, am I gonna am I gonna lose my job to AI? Does it make sense to invest all this money as a down payment when I could rent and be a little bit more carefree? So you have these issues in the studio market. Plus, a lot of them, sometimes the one I've seen, a lot of them they need work. So it's like there's a lot going on in that market to unpack it. So three things. First is a market problem. We're seeing a little bit of it here. Second is a product problem, which I just mentioned. Renovation is one, or maybe you did renovations and they're not great. They're very unique to your specific taste, and it's not something that's broad. So see, those are three. But the third one, really, spoiler alert, this is 99% of them. It's a price problem. At the end of the day, it's a price problem. So when you're just ingesting all of this.
Is.
So to come back to your point, when we're ingesting all this data, it's awesome because we can see all the listings come in. It's like we're living in the matrix, like all this stuff comes in, but you really have to take each one and sort of examine the actual context of that specific listing. And that's just not something you can just really do without digging into that specific listing with human eyes when it comes in. But I'll tell you this, instead of looking at a price, I like to look at a range, and we call it like the inside market. And one of the things that we've done through the data is understanding, the inside market's a concept we stole from the equity markets, which is the distance between the bid and the ask. And that's the inside. There's a similar thing in real estate. And one of the things we looked at is if you have to your point, one of the things we did is we added a theoretical price to basically every listing that was on the market. And then we looked at, well, where did it close and how long did it take to get there? And one of the things we realized is that units that are priced close to their theoretical price, within 10%, will eventually trade. And the ones that are really close, within 5%, 3%, those trade very, very quickly. Days on market and the chance to fail just exponentially increases once you get past like 12, 15% away from sort of that inside market range. Once you're past that, the views stop, interest stops, days on market elongates, and essentially the listing fails. So you just got to nail the range. You don't have to nail the price. You got to nail the range.
The range. Oh, I 100% agree. Go ahead.
There's an interesting other phenomenon that I've been seeing too, right? So let's say the price is relatively okay. You're getting a lot of saves on StreetEasy. You may even get a lot of showings, but then you're not getting any second showings and you're not getting any other offers. And this has happened occasionally, in this office. I've spoken to agents, and what I've pinpointed is that for one reason or another, the property looks better online than it does in person. Maybe it's virtually staged and it looks phenomenal. Maybe the photos were taken from just the right angle to leave out something that is less than desirable in the view. And then when people go there, the experience doesn't match the expectation. And again, back to the buyer psychology, what you need to make sure is that people feel better walking into the property than they expected. Because otherwise, if someone walks in and has super high expectations and then they're in and then they're disappointed, they're never going to bid on it. But if you want the online appearance to look just good enough to get them in the door, and then you need them to feel at home. You need them to be wowed when they walk in, because that is the only way that you're going to get them emotionally connected. So as much as this is a rational, price-oriented piece and a consumer is going to just throw at anything that's overpriced, even if it's priced correctly, you still need the in-person experience to be superior to the digital experience.
You are reading my mind, because I was going to ask you guys this a little later on, because what I've learned in 24 years doing this is, we all say, oh, we're great showers, we're this, we're that. It ain't about you, okay? It's about the apartment and how it shows and how it's set up and the expectation from when you look at it online in a photograph or in a video. And you get there and you see it. I've heard many times, oh, this doesn't look anything like the photographs or the pictures or the video, whatever. Or, yeah, this is great, or great, depiction, or even better than the photographs. So it really is not about us. Sure, we have to be good at what we do, but we have to be better at marketing and get that expectation, as Jared just said, where someone's going to feel comfortable when they walk in. Because I'm still convinced, you're right, John, it's always about prices. Right. I told you before, my manager, when I was first hired 24 years ago, said, get it priced right and you'll sell it. So it's about that for sure, or range, but it's also about what it looks like when you walk in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we all know not everybody in New York lives clean, or they're messy, and there are a whole bunch of things. So you got to make sure when you're taking photographs, they show well, and when you're showing, it shows well. I'm all over that. That's 100% correct.
Totally. And there's a reason the New Yorker wrote an article on Jason Saff, who does all the staging, because
he's terrific, by the way.
He's amazing.
He's amazing.
And when we talk to him, it's really about that.
He was an agent, by the way, before he became a decorator.
He's got an eye, well, not only for how to decorate, how to stage it, but how to sell that staging, and how to sort of trick the brain into that visceral thing 100%. When you walk in the door. It's like, I could live here. That's to Jared's point. That's exactly the feeling you want. So, price can only take you so far. And, to your point, Jared, there's some sellers that look, if you price it right, you might not want to sell today because it just doesn't make sense. But that being said, if the price is right and you do want to sell, it still has to work for the buyer. So at the end of the day, in our view at least, it all comes down to the bids. It all comes down to the buyers. 100%. And if the buyer doesn't click, it doesn't matter what the price is.
Yeah, the 100%. Emotional connection is everything. And price is an important way of getting there, but it's not everything.
Exactly. As we talk about it in this business, it's all emotional. And that's why we go home exhausted every day. It's all about emotion. But you're right. If you don't have that emotional connection when you first walk in, it's not going to grow on you. Okay, you've got to feel it when you first walk in. Jared, how do you quantify the financial cost of overpricing to a seller in a way that actually resonates? I mean, we talked a little bit about this before in the first block, but seller says, no, I really want this price, blah, blah, whatever. How do you quantify the cost of that to them when we know instinctively it's not going to be right?
So there's a few different ways. One, as John talked about earlier, is, you show that, difference between the listing discounts between accurate pricing or not, and you can extrapolate that into the amount that they would need to move off of their price. But the other way is also in what are they spending to carry this property, right? Mm-hmm. Especially if they're not living there. We see a lot of times in an estate, piece that, there's 3 or 4, heirs. They want the most amount of money. They've been counting on this, for years. And, no one's in there. It's empty. They're, carrying this, or, someone may have left and bought something else. So if it's empty, you have to be able to say, okay, well, if it's going to take you 6 months versus 3 months or 9 months or whatever it is, what is the monthly carry? Right, especially if there's an assessment coming up.
Which is all important today more than anything else.
And then this is where you have to look at some of the hitting things. Is there work that's going to need to be done? Is there something happening in the building later? That there's a risk factor in carrying this thing longer than you need, because other things may arise, new things need to be disclosed, additional costs may be unearthed, and this creates sort of that hidden cost burden. So we know what the market is today. No one knows what the market is going to be tomorrow.
John, what do you think? Why does it take agents sometimes a little too long to recommend a price reduction? Based on everything we've talked about, is it they're embarrassed to go to the seller and say, hey, this is really not working? Or remember the conversation we had when we were talking about the right price? I've noticed and I've heard, through my friend network, sometimes it takes agents a little longer to go to a seller and say, this isn't working. And as you indicated before, with some of the apps that we have today, days on market, I wish we can get rid of days on market. We talk about it, but they're still around. Why do we hesitate?
Well, first of all, I love days on market, and I like to. I wish
You
it could,
do.
I wish it could be
Of course
measured for real. So we actually have multiple measures of days on market. We
Yeah.
don't show them all because they're not. There's one way of measuring days on market. We all kind of agree on that.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like, all right, that's like the marketing days on market. But I can show you units that they've really been on sale for 6 years. And it goes off, comes on, goes off, comes on, and the price ticks
100%.
down every one. But it's just like that's helpful information, at least for me when I'm looking at the market. So I'll agree to disagree on that one because I think days on market is super helpful.
Okay.
But to your point, why is it a difficult conversation? Because it's an emotional one. And if you haven't done the groundwork before, then it becomes purely an emotional conversation. It's almost like admitting like, oh God,
I'm wrong.
I took the candy from the candy jar, right? It's that almost like that childlike,
caught.
I got caught, I made a mistake. Like it's a very difficult conversation to have.
Yeah.
But if you have it up front, like, all right, here's what we're gonna do. Here's where we think the market is. Here's what we're gonna try. If in 30 days we're not getting X amount of offers, X amount of showings, X amount of views, likes, like all these metrics, we're going to go to plan B, which is we cut the price to this. And if you have that conversation beforehand, well, then it's a mechanical thing. Like, all right, it's day 30. It's time to cut the price. We've already agreed on it. Great, let's go. Like, it's already set. It's easier.
Comments?
I suggest to agents that if they're going to take a property that is priced higher than they would like or that they've advocated for, then put it in the listing agreement that if X is not done on this date, we're going to cut the price of this. Build it into the listing agreement so that it's contractually agreed to upfront.
Well, that's what I was getting at before.
Yeah.
When do we talk about those dates and how do we structure that? That's a great idea. I didn't think of that. But you put in the listing agreement. If we don't sell at this point, we reduce it down to that number. We days on market.
Yeah.
Make a lot of difference or make sense to people who are out there looking. Why does splitting the difference always fall or fail in practice? I mean, I haven't had that conversation with a seller or a buyer in a very long time lately, but we used to, especially in hot markets.
Yeah.
Or no, not in hot, in kind of okay markets. Why does it fail?
Well, I think it's a cop-out strategy if we're talking about how you're going to list
Very
because
cop-out.
it doesn't put you in the position, no one's happy, right? So they say a good negotiation is where no one's happy, right? But in this regard, when you're talking about how to list, no one's happy and no success is made, right? So it's really a double dagger. If you're going to price it high, at the seller wants, and at least you could have gone on record and say, I object to this price and we're going to try it your way, right? But if you're now agreeing to a price that you in your heart of hearts don't believe is right, then you've now misled your seller by saying, I think we can do it at this, and then we can't. So you've set yourself up and your seller up to fail. Rather, if you say, look, this is my price, this is where we can move it, this is where we need to be.
Meeting in the middle?
Meeting in the middle doesn't really work because it still sets you up to fail rather than try to move the seller off their number a little bit, build into the listing agreement or some other, agreement where you're being able to say, okay, if we haven't gotten this many showers or this an offer, then we need to make some movement. At least you're going to get the property to where it needs to be as quickly as possible.
I'm totally going to defer to Jared on this one because, it says on the bottom of the microphones and other places, master the craft. He has clearly mastered the craft. The only thing I would add to that is, and you
See, I'm not
mentioned
the
it
only
earlier-
one who sees that. Okay. There you go.
You mentioned it earlier. It's all about communication, and a paper cut of a price cut doesn't
Absolutely.
communicate anything other than like I'm stubborn and I'm not really going to negotiate. If you come in aggressively and you make a marked price down that grabs attention, you'll hopefully have a lot better traction off that. Now, again, I mentioned range earlier, so you really just want to get in the range. So you don't have to go overboard. You just have to get yourself into that range.
And
All right, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's also back to that buyer psychology, there's a certain pricing mechanism, right? So again, so much of our consumer search traffic here is on StreetEasy. And while you can type in any price, most people go to one of the preset filters. So there are certain ranges that are naturally putting people in those buckets. So making sure then that your price is at the top end of a range and not at the bottom end of a range is another important strategy.
Quickly before we go to break, just how accurate are comps? Okay, because I find sometimes that comps are not correct because the last listing price or the listing price is not necessarily what the sold price is. They just close out the listing at that price. How accurate are comps?
There's two things. So when we talk about comps, we talk about verified closed sales price. So I only look at what ACRA says. I don't look at what the recorded sale price is because that's often incorrect.
Smart.
But they're 100% accurate. The problem is they're 6 to 9 months old. So they're not timely. And that's the biggest issue with them.
Okay. Another quick break. We're coming right back after this. Talking New York real estate here on the More Network. We will be right back.
This podcast is supported by the More Network, powered by Brown Harris Stevens. Real estate touches every aspect of our lives, from design and architecture to investing and the economy. Now there's a way to get all your real estate information in one place, the More Network. With more than 20 podcast and webcast series, the Mastery of Real Estate Network is powered by Brown Harris Stevens, one of the country's most distinguished brokerages. Discover advice from notable entrepreneurs, compelling topics, and access to top global real estate experts. Subscribe to their YouTube and Apple podcast channels by visiting getmorenetwork.com.
Okay, guys, we're back. So before I continue, John, I want to just ask you because your article, I keep saying, was really, really, really well written and very data filled. What inspired you to write that particular article at this time right now?
We talk with a lot of brokers day in, day out. And one of the number one questions that always comes back to us is help. I need pricing. And usually it's on day 95. Like they feel like they're about to lose the listing. They need a price cut. What can I do? How can I save this listing? How can I get this into a contract? And so, for years and years and years, we've had this conversation. So I'm generally trying to help the industry by letting them know, you need to have this conversation before you get the listing, before you take the listing. So if you're taking an overpriced listing, you're likely going to be having multiple price cut conversations. So prepare yourself for it, because if you don't get the price to where it needs to be, it's just not going to happen. It's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And Jared, you wrote a blog, a piece for a BHS blog. What inspired you to do that? I mean, you're a great writer. You write every week, but that particular one this past week was also awesome. What were you thinking and why now?
Yeah, I mean, we are in that two-speed market, right? So it's building off the article that John wrote. It's building in, the buyer psychology in the piece about how do you create this emotional connection, which I think is now your sequel to this episode, is, creating that emotional connection with the buyer, because that's really what it's about, is making the buyer feel good in that market and making the buyer feel that there's other people that are feeling good about that property at the same time. And that's the only way that you get this extrinsic motivation into the buyer's psyche at that moment to get them to act quickly.
Yeah. All right. So based on what Jared said before, and I've done this in the past where sometimes it's a difficult conversation with the seller in the pricing conversation. And so you take them around to see competition, to see what, they get out there. I've done this before. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the exercise, I believe, is important, is imperative. How do we, if they don't want to do that, how do we explain to them, John, what competition out there is? Because you said it right in the article. It's not about, the comps of 6 months ago or whatever. It's about what people are buying now or what buyers want to buy now. That's based on competition, seller competition. How do you explain that competition?
Well, I think
to the
Jared,
seller
adequately.
adequately.
As usual, Jared said it best, and that's basically, I think it's a fantastic idea to take sellers out and show them what's available.
Oh, it's incredible.
Because I think one of the biggest thing that sellers don't understand is that, and agents also don't understand this, is buyers for specific property type at a specific price range, they know the market better than anyone. They know it cold.
Yes, they do.
They have filters that come in. They're getting multiple emails a day. They see every new listing as it comes up, and they're instantly able to say, that's worth a look. That's not worth a look. That's priced too high. That's priced too low. They are savants when it comes to where things should trade.
Yes,
so if you're not in sync with that, it's a problem. So for a seller to kind of understand that, it's helpful if you live in a building that has a lot of volume. You can kind of get a sense for who's on the market. It's not that big of a lift to take the elevator down a few floors, go check out a listing. Okay, that's easy. But definitely go out and about, leave your building, go see what the competition is for buildings similar to yours that might be a higher price or lower price, and get a sense for, all right, well, what are the renovations like? How does this compare to mine? How's the light? How are the views? All these things.
And it's getting easier. I mean, we're seeing our Brown Harris Stevens open house index that Sarah Rada puts out. I mean, we're back to the sort of open house culture, right? Brunch on a Sunday and then go stroll into some open houses.
And the numbers are increasing.
We're seeing more and more of our open houses be not by appointment only, which I highly recommend. If someone wants to come in, let them come in, right? Don't put any variables or obstacles.
I don't like by appointment only.
It's a great way to tell the sellers, look, go stroll the neighborhood, go see. And it's easy.
I mean, honestly, I do it on my own time.
Yeah.
Like, I will just, if I buy something that looks good, I'll go in and check it out because I'm very curious, like what's the asking price right now? What is the current feel for a unit like this in today's market, just to get a sense?
Okay, Jared, once again, reading my mind. So you mentioned open house. So, through the years post-COVID, open houses kind of went way downhill. No interest at all. No attendance, just horrible. But people are telling me, I haven't seen it yet, that they're ticking back up. What's the deal with open houses? Because I think a lot of it has to do with pricing. I think a lot of it has to do with market and what's out there competitively. But what happened to open houses? Why did they die? And now it's kind of slowly inching back, maybe. Your thought on that?
Brokers got lazy. When we were mandated to do it by open house during the early days of COVID, by appointment only. I think brokers got comfortable in the fact of just saying, well, if, I'll show it during these times. If you want to make an appointment, reach out. But you're putting barriers now, for someone to be able to go and see it. And now with the changing way of the aggregators and getting, leads and inquiries, it also created some confusion doing it by open house. So to me, put an open house, have it, whoever wants to come, compress it, do it for an hour and a half, especially if you have a desirable property. Because part of it, again, everything's anchoring back to price and psychology today. But if you're doing it by appointment only, buyers don't see who else is coming through. If you compress an open house to be an hour or an hour and a half at most, get everyone through. Let them see that there's other people interested. If they want to come back for a private appointment afterwards, let them come back. But create this compression point.
I remember, I'm sorry, just a quick aside. I remember when I was renting in the city, I would go to open houses for rentals with my checkbook in my hand.
Yeah.
And I knew, like, if I liked it, I had to write a check that day. And there were units I would go to, and it was teeming with people. It's like, all right, I'm writing the check. So you had and those animal spirits coming on. That's, to your Jared's point, that's exactly what you want.
Absolutely. I remember those days. So, John, how...
By the way, a checkbook is a piece of paper. You write a number on it, and it goes to your bank. It's got some numbers on the bottom.
What is that?
I mean, it's like paper Venmo.
Yeah, there you go. Paper Venmo. That's a great way.
You can write emojis on it.
That's right.
Because somebody asked me recently, I mentioned the word checkbook, and in their 20s, one of my nieces or nephews, and said, "What's a checkbook?"
Yeah.
I like that. Paper Venmo.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, and I just kind of looked at my brother like, they don't know what a checkbook is.
They don't.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And he just said...
What's worse is there's a checkbook register.
Yes.
I mean, don't get me started.
I use mine digitally.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Digital, it's like whatever. Venmo, you said it before. Again, talking to sellers, talking to buyers, whatever, how do you define your best value without kind of making people think that it's like the cheapest one out there, so I just run and grab it and buy it? Because people will look at pricing, sometimes sellers, and say, that's too cheap. It's like, it's not really a good value for me or for anybody. How do you define or explain, rather, the difference between value at a low price or something is just cheap?
Well, I think I
don't think anything in New York is cheap. But
that's a great question. It's the value that you see as a seller is not the same that the value that the buyer sees.
Of course.
So really, you want to be able to get the buyer to see the same thing that you see. And the question about that is like, all right, going back to your competition idea, like go out and see it. So
and explaining.
Yeah, I mean, and that's pricing is one thing. That pricing gets them in the door. And to Jared's point, you got to reduce as many frictions as possible. And that's sales 101. You don't want zero friction. Get people in the door. Get them experiencing. Like, let them see it for themselves. Because once they've convinced themselves, like, I could live here, everything else is downhill.
How do you balance winning the listing versus pricing it correctly from day one? I mean, because there is a difference.
It's definitely a tightrope to walk. And this goes back to some of what we opened the show with. But again, I like to sort of demystify it. I like to call it out where I'm telling the seller, like, look, yes, I am a broker. Yes, I want to sell your home. But you're only coming to me because you want to sell your home too. So our goals are aligned. So the fact that I want to make a commission to help you realize your goal is not different than you wanted to sell to get your proceeds out. So if we are both committed to selling your property, then we need to price price it where it is. If we can sort of change that conversation and move it in that direction, and then you also can play the takeaway game where you can say, look, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it sounds like you have a different strategy. I don't believe that I'm the right broker to execute that strategy, so I'm more than happy for you to go and select another broker. But if the strategy that you want to execute doesn't give you the success that you want, then you have my number and you know how to call me. And sometimes they'll be like, okay, thank you. And you just avoid it as 6-month nightmare and you may or may not get that call back. And other times they'll be like, no. Like, I trust you. I want, like, okay, let's do it. So playing that takeaway is okay. And, sometimes being the second or third broker is a good thing. So
I teach this in continuing ed all the time in real estate school. There is a point when you need to walk away from an overpriced listing for a whole bunch of reasons, or, sometimes your relationship is just not working. And that always falls into why it may be priced incorrectly. People aren't paying attention to what you have to say. Where's your credibility? I always say as a real estate agent, if you don't have credibility and transparency and authenticity and a whole bunch of other things, you're not going to make it.
Yeah. Okay.
People need to understand or believe who you are and what you say is accurate. Everybody's going to give you a problem or a fight when it comes to a price.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just going to do that, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've discovered when we talk with top brokers is that, talking to the highest performing brokers, not only in New York City, but we've also had some in New Jersey, Florida. It's amazing what sort of bubbles up to the top because everybody has their own way of doing it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, top brokers realize they're only taking a listing if they can sell it. Mm-hmm. And the key for a lot of these people is just saying no. And, I think there was a broker, I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but basically said, I make a fantastic living as a second broker.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be the first broker. I want to be the second broker because my job is a lot a lot easier. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that I think a lot of sellers don't understand how difficult it actually is to price an apartment before it hits the market. It's not like an appraiser who has a contract in hand and says, all right, well, the buyer and the seller met at 1.2. What do you think the price is worth? Okay, well, let me see. I think it's about 1.2, right? Like that's a different conversation entirely. So you're looking at multiple variables, none of which really have a defined structure, and you're trying to sort of narrow it down to this range. That's a really, really difficult job.
And the dilemma usually comes in where the seller, you might be the second broker, maybe the third broker. I've been a third broker, where the seller will give in and give you a price decrease to where it needs to be after 2 or 3 brokers, and the first guy says, "What happened to me? Why wouldn't they listen to me?" Yeah. Right? And now you're on the market way too long. So how does that shake out?
Well, it's interesting. So if the top brokers are going to know the upper bounds of where they can reasonably deliver value, the big flex for them is being able to say no if something's overpriced because they have enough business. They don't need it. And they're keenly aware of the opportunity cost by taking on a listing that's going to take longer to sell, take money, expense, and ultimately take a lot of time in managing that relationship. So if the top agents are saying no to that listing, or they're giving a price that the seller is not comfortable with, then you're going to have a lower grade agent that may not have as much experience that just wants the listing. And they're going to buy that listing by overpromising. They're inexperienced in many cases, so they won't be able to properly navigate or set the expectations. And they're going to whittle that seller down. And then they're going to get fired at the end of the listing, or it's not going to get renewed. And then they're going to go to another broker that told them what they should have done in the first place. And that's, again, in a generalized statement, a lot of times what we see happening.
I've walked away from sellers a couple of times. Recent one was a year ago. Told them the price was too high, wouldn't listen. And we talked about this before the show, Jared, and that apartment is still on the market 1 year later.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing, too, is now with the new buyer-broker agreements, there are opportunities for agents to kind of say, hey, I'm not the right agent for you. For example, when a seller says, I'm not going to be paying the buyer side of the brokerage, I'll only pay you, the listing agent. So, okay, you either work with that and try to figure it out, or you say, not for me, and walk away. I'm more apt to say, not for me, because, we mentioned applications before that consumers or buyers now have access to. We can't always count on them coming directly to you because a big buyer pool out there has a lot of buyers that they want to take to see brand new listings. And if they're not getting paid, they're not going to do it. So, I tell sellers all the time, let's understand where we are and what it really all means, not just because the laws changed. let's just test the market. We talked a little bit about this as we've gone through, right? I want to come out on the market. Let's test it. Maybe we'll do, I don't know, $75,000 more than the last apartment sold. What do you say to a seller who says, let's test the market? Lately, I've been saying we can't do that. And here are all the reasons why we can't do that. And people still ask.
I'm glad you start with Jared on this one. Just going to get comfortable.
Sellers still ask that question. Can't we just test the market and see where we go based on days on market?
Yeah.
If you're testing for 90 days, you're old.
Like I said before, we'll bring 6 of our colleagues and we'll give you different pricing opinions and we'll be able to figure out where the market is there.
Not enough of that is happening like it used to. I love that idea.
But again, this is where you have to be able to focus on the master of the craft, of that expertise, of that experience, and be able to go and show it to the seller. Like, look, we'll bring 6 of the powerhouse brokers from this office. We'll go out there. We'll tell you where it is right now. What more do you need to test? Because if you test, you're basically testing now. You're not on the market. No one's seeing it. It's going to be the same thing if you come on and you misprice it. You're going to have crickets. And I like the days on market because it is a seller and a listing broker's accountability partner. It keeps you honest, and it means that you need to be able to work and deliver. It is the only equalizer that there is in leverage, right? If you have that balance beam or seesaw, it is the focal point of creating that leverage differential. So days on market is really essential to be able to create this sort of transparent, fair, and healthy marketplace that we otherwise take for granted.
Urban Digs, as I said before, a must. King of data, king of information. Why are we so addicted to everything you guys put out? I mean that in a good way. Tell us why it's so important to our community as agents, as managers, as whomever.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I think it's kind of a no kings period. However, I would say that, a lot of it comes down to the fact that, our job is we're not consumer facing mainly. We help agents. We have agents' backs. Like that's our job. And my partner, Noah Rosenblatt at Urban Digs, his rapport with agents to help them understand very difficult data is it's unparalleled. So you can get in a room and he can break down the most complicated concepts into bite-sized takeaways, and he can help you sort of communicate that to your clients in a way that I'm still amazed by. So I think he does a really, really great job at that.
He's awesome, and he does do a great job at that. But I find it really necessary that we, as agents, have as much information, as much access to data as possible, because that's how we learn.
Yeah.
Or that's how we stay, on top of what's happening in our industry.
Well, one of the things I've noticed is that, there's multiple angles to selling an apartment, right? Price is just one.
Oh.
And the rest is positioning, strategy, marketing,
competition,
all of that stuff. So we're really happy to help with the data and the pricing aspect. So if we can just sort of take that off your plate, let us do that. We're really good at that. And then you can work on positioning, strategy, all of that stuff, because that's stuff that really you should be focused on, or even better, going out and finding new clients.
Hello. As I said a couple of weeks ago on the show, everything can always be very urgent in our industry. But if you're only focusing on that one urgent thing and forgetting about what you just said, going out and finding other clients, you're going to get all jammed up worrying about this, right?
Right.
So you got to spread it out. You're also, I'm not going to use the word king, but you're also a guru of data. So how do you, explain that or the importance of it in our industry?
Well, I to some extent, I experience a world through data, which I guess is a scary thing.
You do. You do.
Yeah, Jared's in the Matrix with me. He is.
Hey, yeah, absolutely.
All zeros and ones. So it's a matter of being able to have sort of a running benchmark, right? The fact, I joke with Noah and John all the time that day one of COVID, so I've been tracking now 320 plus weeks. I have the spreadsheet pulling off at the same time from their data, so I can slice and dice in whatever way, but I know that I always have that pulse. Every Friday morning, I'm checking their ticker. We're understanding I'm either getting excited or disappointed. It freeforms what we're going to be able to write about, but data helps you be able to have sort of that consistent thread, that consistent line of what's going on, so you can always anchor against it. And in this business, when there is so much reactiveness, when there is so much changing, you need to be able to have some sort of commonality, some sort of common thread, some sort of consistency so that you can always reference back to it. And that's why it has been really important to me and helped me be able to quickly look at a property or quickly help an agent and say, okay, what does my gut tell me? Where is this price? High, low? What do we need to do? What do we need to fix? Where do we need to tweak? Helping in multiple bid situations and things like that. So data is really everything. but until it's not. And the important thing is when you're working with the buyer, and this will tie it home, I think, if the buyer doesn't feel like there's other bids, then we're going to anchor it entirely on the data. Hey, these are the comps. This is what it is. This is what's traded. Now, in a multiple bid situation, you know what the conversation becomes with the seller? What is it worth it to you to not lose the property? That will yield a very different offer. One is based upon the data that's going to be anchored there. One is now an emotional, potentially irrational pricing decision that says, I've been searching for this long. This is the perfect thing. I can envision myself being here, and I'm going to put in this offer. So as a seller, if you can create a difference in that question that a buyer is asking their agents, hey, what should I bid? Or an agent's asking, hey, what should I bid to not lose it? That's going to yield a very different outcome.
Well said.
That's great.
Well said. On that note, we're going to take one final break, and we'll be right back with my final thoughts right after this.
Hi, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you know the right partner makes all the difference. At Roadway, we deliver an experience your clients will love. For specialized services and white glove care, choose Roadway. Want to learn more? Email me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
Okay, everybody, we are back with my final thoughts. So, pricing isn't being right. It's about being effective early enough where it matters. In a market like New York City, the window for leveraging is short and unforgiving. The first few weeks determine whether you're negotiating from strength or reacting from behind. Most pricing mistakes aren't analytical, they're behavioral. Avoiding tension, chasing agreement, or testing the market at the wrong number doesn't reduce risk. It compounds it. The market gives fast, clear feedback. The difference is whether you're positioned to act on it while you still have the leverage, or the agents who consistently protect value do one thing differently. They tell the truth. They do it early, frame pricing as competition, not opinion, and set expectations before the market has to. Because once the listing loses momentum, you are no longer pricing a property, you're managing a discount. And in this business, timing is just a part of the is not just part of the strategy. It is the strategy. And that's it for this episode of Talking New York Real Estate. I teach my students every week to take a moment to really look inward and ask themselves, who are you at your core? What is your why? The reason you got up in the morning, your purpose, and the driving force between the choices you make. What beliefs guide you, and where did they come from? Your family, your experiences, your struggles, your triumphs. Understanding these pieces of yourself shapes how you move through the world, and once you know them, the challenge is to show up intentionally and be memorable every day, not through perfection or performance, but by living with authenticity, purpose, clarity, and the courage to let people know and feel the real you. And you can follow me on Facebook, on Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Substack, or TikTok at Vince Rocco. And John Wooden says, if you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to do it over? And from all of us here at Talking New York Real Estate and the More Network, to all of you all around the world, thanks for spending a part of your day with us. I am so grateful. Keep thinking the good thoughts, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.